The recording has started.
Thanks, Audrey. All right, let's get started. My name is Torben Grumstrup, and I'm an engineer at the Fire Sciences Lab in Missoula, Montana. And I'm hosting the seminar this week. Our speaker this week is Morris Johnson. He did his graduate studies at the University of Washington and now works for the Forest Service at the Pacific Northwest Lab. And go ahead, Morris, take it away.
Okay, thanks. So can everyone hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, perfect. Let me know when you can see my PowerPoint. So is that coming over okay?
Yep, I can see your PowerPoint. Great. Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, good morning. Well, thanks for the invitation to present or to discuss my research. I really appreciate this opportunity. So today I'm gonna basically give an overview of one of my post-fire management projects. And it's just a general title that I just call Understanding Post-Fire Management Effects on Stand Structure and Woody Fuel Loadings. And so as I move through this PowerPoint, first I would like to just say thanks to all of my collaborators. So I hear some background noise. Thanks. So thanks. First I'd like to just give acknowledge my collaborators, from all the different national forests. I pester a lot of folks, so I like to upfront just say thanks for enduring my constant pestering and answering my emails and my team chats and all those things. So, thanks to all of my collaborators. So I've been working on this for a while, and one of the states that I do a lot of work in is California. And so here is my opening slide, and basically the title is, after the wildfire, what is next? And so I think last year we were doing an open house, a virtual open house, and Ann Carson, who is the Forest Service supervisor for the Mendocino National Forest, we was given a virtual tour to the Representative Hoffman, and in Ann Carson's opening speech, she mentioned that there are a mix of perspectives on how to manage post-wildfire landscapes. And I was thinking, and I started laughing because I was thinking, yes, there's a mix of perspectives, but I can only think of two. But Anne, she has lots of knowledge in terms of lots of experience, because within the last 3 years, 97% of the Mendocino National Forest has burned down. Basically has burned. And I started working with them with Mendocino National Forest in 2008 on the Mendocino complex, on the ranch fire, when we basically had 400,000 acres to burn. And then 3 years later, we had the August complex, which burned, over 1 million acres. And that August complex burned across the Mendocino National Forest, Shasta Trinity National Forest, and the Six River National Forest. And so when she mentioned, there's a mix of perspectives, and she's heard them all. And so, after those large wildfires, you look at the local newspapers and you will see, similar titles like, don't do salvage logging, or do salvage logging, or salvage logging is bad, or salvage logging is good, right? And so I was thinking about, really, what are those perspectives that Ann is talking about? But really, I summarize it based on, there are really two perspectives, right? So there are those who support salvage logging, and then those who are against salvage logging. And so a lot of you probably already know, you've probably seen the literature, opponents of salvage logging, and then they can list their reasons why they are against, post-fire management or salvage logging. And then those who are for salvage logging, they can list their reasons why, salvage logging is beneficial for whatever reasons, right? And, if you're against salvage logging, one of the main things is, salvage logging decreases natural regeneration, right? Or salvage logging, increases fire hazard or fire risk. And on the flip side, the proponents of salvage logging say, well, one of the benefits of salvage logging is that we can recover some of the economic value of the timber, and we want to manage the post-fire woody fuel structure because we want to reduce or prevent this reburn hypothesis, right? So by removing fuels now, we will prevent fuel loadings in the future, and then hopefully that will reduce future fire behavior, right? And so by being an opponent or proponent of salvage logging, really from a management perspective, we are looking at, if you're an opponent of salvage logging, you are really supporting passive management, right? Do nothing. And then if you're for, salvage logging, you are really supporting some type of active management. And so here's the example where we put in some plots on the 2018 Mendocino complex, and we just simulated over time what would happen if we adopted the passive management approach for this stand 21. It's mixed conifer stand. So it had different layers of stand structure. So it has some big trees, some small trees. And so we projected out over time, and we looked at just fuel loading over time. And so the green line is basically no action. And what we see is obviously, the fuel loading increases. And then we basically say, okay, well, what would happen if we look at some form of active management? And so the next two lines, the pink and the blue, represents one of the prescriptions that one of the local environmental groups proposed that we consider as an alternative. And that was then all the snags up to 20.9 inches and leave everything else, right? And so that means leaving all the bigger trees. And then thinning all trees, down to 4 to all the, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12 trees per acre, basically looking at different retention levels for wildlife habitat. And so we basically just projected it over time to look at what would be the loadings over time, and then to compare how those different loadings would accomplish the different management objectives, right? And so from a fire behavior perspective, we can already tell which of these management, approaches will help managers meet their management objectives. And so then we take that same figure and then we project it and overlay a potential reburn hypothesis, right? I mean, a reburn window. And that is, let's say on the Mendocino National Forest, that's the fire behavior, that's the fire history map there. And what we find is that within 15, 20 years, we're going to have a repeat wildfire. So if you have those fuel loadings over time, then most likely you're going to have an increase in soil heating. And then that increase in soil heating is probably going to create post-fire effects that are not going to accomplish the management objectives, right? And so that is the context in which I, set out to work with managers, say, okay, well, in the event that we have these large wildfires, my question to them is, what are we going to do? And so this is just a map of some of the national forests that I'm working with currently. But my big question is to them is, okay, after these large wildfires, are we going to, do salvage logging, or are we not going to do salvage logging? And if we are going to, do salvage logging, obviously we're going to have to either do an EA or EIS. And most of the time we pursue an EA. And so that means we have to go through the NEPA process. And the NEPA process can, consist of, a number of phases, right? So one of the main ones is the purpose and need. So what is the purpose of the project? And then we assemble an IDT team, and it takes about 6 to 9 months. And so when the National Forest say that that they're going to pursue a salvage logging project, I ask if I can join the IDT team. And so by joining the IDT team, I want to go through the entire process, from start to finish. And hopefully, if by being on the IDT team, I can basically come in and help them address, or at least address some of the issues surrounding post-fire management from what I discussed in the beginning. And that is, what are the effects, of doing nothing versus active management. And so I come in and I give myself this title. I'm the monitoring, the post-fire management monitoring coordinator. And so what I want to really do is to basically come in and monitor, what happens if you do salvage logging and what happens if you don't do salvage logging. And so what I want to do is integrate a monitoring protocol within the forest management project. And so I use the basic principle of experimental design, to make sure that the monitoring protocol is robust, right? And so one of the things that I push for when we go through the purpose and need is that we add a learning objective to the purpose and need. So most of if you look at some of the NEPA documents, so here's an example on the El Dorado National Forest after the Pioneer Fire. So if you go look at the purpose and need, obviously the number one is probably going to be reduce the risk from falling in dead trees, recover the economic value. So all of the boilerplate ones that are relevant for post-fire management. But if you look at line item 6, what I have in there, or what they agreed to include, is that we're going to use this large wildfire to address some of the scientific, to promote scientific research surrounding basically post-fire management. So just something to that effect. Here's an example on the Plumas National Forest. They put in a little bit more detail. This is after the Walker Fire from 2019. This is the current one. This is the August complex on the Plaska Keller Mendocino National Forest. If you look at the purpose and need, you would see some reference to that we're going to use this fire as an example to address some of the controversies surrounding salvage logging. And then this is on the Shasta Trinity National Forest. You can basically see the exact same thing. And then this was from 2017. This is the Boise National Forest. And so really, when I am working on the team, the objective of my research is really to establish a long-term monitoring project to look at the short and the long-term effects of salvage logging. So I want to look at what happens if you do salvage logging. What are the short-term effects? Obviously, if they do the salvage logging, I basically measure the pre-treatment and then post-treatment, and then we would basically look at the long-term effects. Excuse me, by looking at what happened to post-fire fuel succession over time, because we have the control units, right? And then obviously we have a number, just a set of research questions. What are the effects of salvage logging on stand structure? Finding and course with the fuels, and then what treatment affect shrubs and seedling regeneration? So we have sampling design set up to look at treatment effects on shrubs and seedlings. And then, this is the pie in the sky, is, what are the effects of salvage logging has on, and regeneration has on, herbicide application has on shrub regeneration. So this, in this case, after you do the salvage logging, after you do the planting, we were hoping that we can compare herbicide application to no herbicide application. And then how does different spacing of planting regeneration affect stand development? And so in this case, we were hoping that we can replant the area with different spacings, even spacing versus clumping versus no salvage logging. And so I work with the Forest Service, and I also work with BLM, and usually BLM land is where their units are they're pretty odd shape. And so for the BLM land, most of the time I have to do a paired design. But for the Forest Service land, so the monitoring approach that I have been implementing is a randomized block design. And so what I have been implementing is I have two sizes. So I have a randomized block design 2.3. Basically, each of the cut units is 2.3 acres. And then I have a randomized block design, excuse me, where each of the cut unit is 5.4 acres. And so I'm just going to walk through the example that the most recent one, like, is on the Mendocino National Forest. So Mendocino National Forest August Complex. So obviously as we go through we identify our planning area, and then we identify the potential polygons, and then everyone on the IDT team, all the specialists, basically go through and we basically shrink those, right? Because we have to get rid of areas that are on steep slopes. We have to get rid of areas that, you know, contain noxious weeds, until we end up reducing the potential polygons that we're going to do salvage logging in. And so from those potential planning areas that we're going to do the salvage logging, this is where I say, oh, I'm going to implement the randomized block design. And so real simple, you know, in this case, I think I have 5 blocks. I can't remember. So either 4 or 5 blocks. But, you know, within each of those potential polygons that we're going to do salvage logging, I basically implement the blocks. So each block has 3 cut units. And I think in this case, each of the cut units is 5.4 acres. And so each block has 3 cut units. Then we randomly assign 1 of 3 treatments. And so obviously there's going to be a control, full salvage, and then the partial salvage. And I will talk about the partial salvage later. And so each of the 5.4 acres has 24 fixed area plots. And then at each plot center, we have 4 brown transects. The first azimuth is random, and we just add 90 degrees. And then it's a nested fixed area plot where we're looking at trees less than 5 inches, and then we're looking at trees greater than 5 inches. And we do DBH and species and height and all that kind of stuff, right? And then for 1,000-hour fields, those fields that are greater than 3 inches, we do distance from plot center, and then, you know, just measure the 1 hour, 10-hour, 100-hour fields, 1,000-hour fields. And then in some cases, we also measure shrubs and non-woody, so we have a protocol to look at that stuff. Now I mentioned that we look at no harvest, so control, full salvage, and then the partial salvage. Now, when I'm working with the different national forests, I don't show up on the forest and request that they implement a particular salvage harvest treatment. So I leave it up to them to determine what they are interested in exploring as an alternative post-fire management treatment. So on the Mendocino National Forest, like I say, we adopted a partial salvage harvest treatment based on what one of the environmental groups wanted, and that was we would mark the unit where we would cut all trees up to 20.9 inches. On the Colville National Forest, they wanted to thin, you know, to 3.4 square meters per hectare. And then they had, you know, that was their full salvage, so they wanted to leave some trees. And then for the partial, they wanted to thin down to 10.3. And then on the Colville tribe land, you know, they had the full salvage where they removed everything, and obviously the control units. And then their partial salvage was 3.4. Boise National Forest, they wanted to salvage harvest and target a residual stand density based on, you know, wildlife habitat. So that varied over time. And then the Plumas National Forest, I actually have 2 projects on the Plumas National Forest, and one of them was, you know, this was a difficult one, but they was gracious enough to implement salvage harvest retention. So I'll just talk about that one. So each of the 5.4 cut units has 24 fixed area plots. So that's the control, right? And then within the 24 fixed area plots, there's 15 subplots based on the corners of the 24 fixed area plots. And so in the middle, all the blue would be, you know, that's the full salvage, so everything get removed. And so what we did for the partial harvest is we basically randomly selected 4 of the subplots, and then everything in the blue and the partial harvest that gets removed, and then everything else stays in the unit. It's yeah, it's from a planning perspective, it's not the best, but they was willing to entertain it, and I appreciate that. But yeah, so but in the end, the NEPA obviously everyone probably know that the NEPA process it's time consuming, and it usually takes 6 to 9 months, and over that time, what happens is a lot of the timber loses its value, and over the time, out of many out of many of the projects I have implemented, I've only had 2 that we've actually completed in terms of getting the timber harvested. And that's just what happens, because a lot of times on these large wildfires, especially in California, when we have a large wildfire that burns across the landscape, the large wildfires, they burn federal land, but they also burn private timber land. For example, SPI, Sierra Pacific in California, and Sierra Pacific, they don't have to go through the extensive process that we have to go through in order to harvest dead trees. And then they also own the mills, so they can harvest their timber. And then once the market is flooded, then the federal timber is less desirable, right? So with that said, I have lots of units that have not been harvested. So that means I have lots of no action or control units that I can look at projections over time, and then I can use those to go back in and remeasure. And I think the Pioneer is slated to be remeasured. I think it'll be 5 years. And so what I've done with what I do with all of the projects before the salvage logging actually happens is I use the FVS model to project what I think is going to happen with fuel loading, and then we can go back in and remeasure in the future to calibrate to see if how far the model is off. And so, but I some of the success stories have been like on the Colville National Forest. We actually did complete the salvage logging. We had 5 blocks. And we completed the salvage logging. And then the Colville the Colville tribe land. Sorry. And then the Colville tribe land this year, in 2021, we had 3 big large wildfires. And so next summer, we are actually going to implement another randomized block design because we were successful. I think it was 2 years ago. So we're gonna try to do it again and see what happens. I'm excited because they are actually cutting the trees now. So I'm actually behind the gun trying to catch up with them. And so what we do, if the units are not salvage logged, we can make projections over time by looking at the initial stand conditions, and we can say, okay, across this landscape, areas that have the initial basal area and species and DBH, we can make projections over time and say, okay, this is what we think the loading is going to be. And then a lot of managers, they, especially on the Mendocino National Forest, they can use this to make to plan future fuel reduction treatments across the landscape. And so obviously the ultimate goal is to get the salvage logging completed, summarize the data, and then get it published in the peer review literature. And this is the Colville National Forest. This was a randomized block design. It wasn't an EA, it was actually a CE because they did not have the resources or the time to go through the whole NEPA process. So we ended up doing a CE, mainly because they was working with a collaborative group. And the collaborative group, they really wanted to set up a showcase to show where we can do salvage logging, and they wanted to implement this randomized block design. And then now they can basically has it as a centerpiece to show people on tours to say, okay, here's an area that we did do salvage logging. These were the treatment effects, and then this is what is happening over time. So what we found in this area was basically there was a significant increase in the 10 and the 100-hour fuels, but there was a significant increase, but the significant increase wasn't it, in terms of loading wise, that it wasn't very significant in terms of affecting fire behavior. But compared to the control, there was a significant increase. And then basically the same thing on the Colville tribe land. This data is still in review. So the 10-hour and the 100-hour fields have a significant increase. You can see the significance. And then over time, if you do the projections compared to the control units, no action, there would be a significant increase compared to thinning trees. And then I think that, oh yeah, and so basically this is just summarizing, so this project basically integrate research in the forest management community because it's more of it's a co-production. So we work with the managers. I'm working with the managers on issues that are, basically forefront for them. And so we're also developing site-specific monitoring projects across the landscape, and we hope that this data will help them design future NEPA projects. So obviously, like I said, on the Missoula National Forest, you can see that 97% of the forest has burned, and this is not just the case on the Missoula National Forest. Even on the Plumas National Forest, they've had lots of reburns. Even on the Shasta Trinity, last year they had a big wildfire. This year they had a big wildfire, and so we hope that these projects will help them, develop future NEPA projects. And then obviously with the control units, we can always go back in and then remeasure and look at the long-term effects of not doing salvage logging. And then I think that's it for me.
All right, thank you, Morris. If anyone has any questions, go ahead and type them up in the chat box. And we'll get them to Morris. While we're waiting, Morris, I'm curious about the technique of leaving intermittent snags from a stand that's been burned over. I had always assumed that was for wildlife, but are there other benefits to ground cover regeneration or regrowth of the timber?
Yes. Yeah, so you can, it's for wildlife. It's also for fine woody debris, for nutrients. It can be to reduce erosion. So there's lots of benefits. Yeah. But it also just depends on what the management objective is.
Great, thank you. Kara asks, I'm curious if there will be any other biological monitoring in the units, plants, wildlife, etc.
Yeah, so the answer is, so we do look at shrubs and non-woody in some of the units, and sometimes we do not. Number one is, depending on the time of the year when we actually inventory the unit, sometimes we would inventory for shrubs and non-woody, but we missed the life cycle, right? And then sometimes we don't attempt to do it because it's a salvage logging unit, and so we know what's going to happen afterwards. But other than the shrubs and non-woody, we do not. One year we attempted to measure nutrients. We had a PhD student to come out and take some cores, but the unit did not get salvage logged. So we did attempt something else, but that was about it.
Layla has a similar question. Is there a wildlife component to any of the monitoring you do? Coming from a spotted owl background, I wonder about this aspect, especially in places like Plumas National Forest, where I know there's ongoing spotted owl research and monitoring.
Yeah, no monitoring related to wildlife. Nope. I invite other people in, but yeah, no. The short answer is no.
Sharon Hood asks, do you have a sense of of if adding a research component to the NEPA helps the process at all, or how collaborative groups like the research involvement?
So, that's a good question, Sharon. So I don't think it causes harm, but I think what it well I think it satisfies some environmental groups when they see it added in there, because like I said, on the Mendocino National Forest, the environmental group requested that we do that partial harvest where we thin all trees up to 20.9 inches. And so by including that as a research component and actually implementing it on the ground, I think that shows that we are listening to them. So I guess it does help.
Let's see, Sharon had another question. Since you have so many control sites, for better or worse, have you looked at how accurate the FVS fueling estimates are?
Yeah, so that is going to be the plan. Is so we're going to make the project. We made the projection with the FVS, and then when we go back in and do the remeasurements, right? So let's say if we go back in and remeasure in 3 years, hopefully 5 years. We go back in 5 years, and then we basically will be able to compare or calibrate if FVS is over projecting or under predicting. And so that is the idea. I don't know if I would go back in 2 years, because FVS, yeah, that's the plan.
Sean Urbanski asks, are there many old 20 years ago high severity fires where salvage and non-salvage both occurred due to state versus fed ownership, and are used to evaluate the strategies and assess FVS simulation accuracy? So similar.
Yeah, so there are areas across the landscape where you can do retrospective studies to look at those and do that, but that's not what I'm doing. Yeah.
Keith Stockman asks, great idea to bring experimental design to the salvage debate. Basic question, what are the mechanisms you're hoping to detect where harvesting impacts fuel loading, more falling trees, seed dispersal from surviving trees, etc.? Also, is 2.3 or 5.4 acres enough to see differences in those mechanisms?
The second part is yes. Let me make sure I understand the first question. What are the mechanisms? I am not looking at with the distance from seed source. No, I don't look at that. So really when I identify the area that I'm going to put the plots in, we're looking at the largest high severity burn areas, right? So we are trying to get away from seed sources. So I understand what his question is, but yeah, we're not looking at the distance from seed source.
And there's a comment from Sharon. Thanks, Morris. That would be great to remeasure the plots and look at fuels over time.
That's the plan.
Any other questions from everybody? If not, thank you. Thank you so much, Morris. It was a great talk. Really enjoyed having you here.
No, thanks for the invite.
I'll send you an email soon asking for your home address so that we can send you a little thank you gift.
Okay. No, and thanks for the questions. Yeah, they're actually good questions, especially the wildlife one. I've been trying to get wildlife on board for a while, but yeah. Brian.
All right, thanks everyone. Tune in 2 weeks for another seminar.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Morris. Bye-bye.
Okay.